A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Tribute Dawn. The morning mist clung to the mountain peaks like a shroud, thick and cold and merciless. Arya Frost stood at the edge of her village with her son's small hand clutched in hers, feeling the dampness seep through her woolen cloak and settle into her bones. Around them, the other villagers gathered in a silent circle, their faces carved from stone, their eyes carefully averted from the scene unfolding before them. She had known this day would come. Every mother in the village knew it could come. But knowing and living through it were two entirely different beasts. Eldrick stood at the center of the gathering, his gray hair braided in the traditional style of the Betas, his weathered face showing no emotion as he read from the ancient scroll. His voice carried across the clearing with the weight of 60 years of service to the pack, each word deliberate and final. By the covenant sworn 3 generations past, when the beast beneath the mountain was sealed by blood and sacrifice, we maintain the ancient balance. Every second winter, when the snows begin to melt and the earth awakens, one child must be given to the guardians of the seal. This is the price of our survival. This is the law that keeps the darkness bound. Eldrick paused, letting the old words settle over the gathered wolves like fresh frost. He did not need to remind them of what happened the one winter a distant valley had tried to refuse the covenant. The cracked earth, the homes swallowed whole, the stories of rivers turned black with ash until the guardians forced the beast back into its prison. Fear of those ruins had shaped every choice the council had made since before he was born. He might doubt the fairness of the price, might carry the weight of every name he had spoken over the years, but he could not risk condemning them all to the same fate. Arya felt Finn press closer to her leg. He was almost 5 years old, small for his age, but strong in the way children who have learned early that the world is hard must be strong. His brown hair fell across his forehead in soft waves, and when he looked up at her with those impossible golden eyes, her heart cracked open all over again. Those eyes. She had never understood where they came from. Her late husband had possessed ordinary brown eyes, as did she. But Finn's were the color of honey held up to sunlight, bright and otherworldly and beautiful. The village elders had muttered about them when he was born, called them blessed or cursed, depending on who was speaking. Now those same eyes marked him as different, made him vulnerable in ways that kept Arya awake at night. The choice has been made, Eldrick continued, his gaze finally settling on Arya, with something that might have been pity, or might have been satisfaction. It was hard to tell with him. Finn Frost, son of Arya Frost, widow and wolfless, will fulfill the covenant this season. The words hit her like physical blows. She had expected them, had felt them coming for weeks now, ever since Eldrick had begun watching Finn with that calculating expression during the village gatherings. A widow with no wolf to defend her claim, no pack standing to grant her protection, no family left to speak for her. She was easy prey. And Finn was the easiest sacrifice. No, the word tore from her throat before she could stop it. Please. There has to be another way. Eldrick's expression did not change. The law is clear, Arya. A child under 5 years must be given. Would you have us choose another? Would you condemn some other mother's son or daughter to spare your own? She wanted to scream yes, wanted to be selfish and cruel, and everything a mother's love could drive a person to become. But she looked around at the other faces in the crowd, saw the relief in the eyes of those with young children, saw the way they held their own sons and daughters just a little tighter. She saw the judgment there, too, the unspoken message that this was justice for the wolfless woman who had always been just slightly apart from the rest of them. "Take me instead," she said, her voice breaking. "I will go to the guardians. I will serve in his place. Just let him stay here. Let him grow up. Let him live. The covenant demands a child," Eldrick repeated, and now there was steel in his voice. Not a woman, not a volunteer. A child under 5 years, given freely by the pack to maintain the seal. Those are the terms our ancestors agreed to, and those are the terms we must honor. Finn's small hand tightened in hers. When she looked down, she saw that he was crying silently, tears streaming down his face while he tried so hard to be brave. He did not understand what was happening. not really. But he understood that his mother was afraid, and that was terrifying in itself. "Mama?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't want to go." The words destroyed her. Arya dropped to her knees in the cold mud, pulling Finn into her arms and holding him so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. She buried her face in his hair, breathing in the scent of him, trying to memorize every detail before they took him away. "I know, my brave boy," she whispered. "I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Movement at the edge of the clearing drew her attention. Through the mist, figures emerged from the tree line. They wore heavy cloaks of dark fur, hoods pulled low over their faces so that only shadow showed where features should be. There were 3 of them, moving with the fluid grace of predators, and the villagers instinctively drew back to let them pass. The rogues, the guardians of the seal, the collectors of the Covenant's price. Arya had seen them before, 2 years ago when they had come for the blacksmith's daughter. She remembered the way the little girl had screamed, remembered the mother's wails that had echoed through the village for weeks afterward. Now she understood that grief with a clarity that made her want to tear the world apart with her bare hands. One of the rogues stepped forward, and though she could not see his face, she felt the weight of his gaze settle on Finn. He said nothing, merely extended one gloved hand in silent demand. "Please!" Arya heard herself begging again, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to stop it. "Please, there must be something else. I will give you anything, everything. Just leave him with me." The rogue's head tilted slightly, and she thought she saw the glint of eyes within that shadowed hood. Then he shook his head once, a slow, deliberate motion that left no room for negotiation. Eldrick moved closer, his hand settling heavy on Arya's shoulder. "It is time. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder?" The word came out sharp as broken glass. "You are taking my child, and you speak to me of hard?" "I speak to you of survival," Eldrick replied, his voice dropping low so only she could hear. "Of the survival of this pack. These people. This way of life. One child every 2 years, or the beast awakens and devours us all. That is the choice our ancestors made, and it is the choice we continue to make. If you cannot understand that, then perhaps you truly do not belong here." The casual cruelty of it took her breath away. She had lived in this village her entire life, had married one of their warriors, had borne his child, and mourned him when he fell in battle against a rival pack. She had picked herbs and tended wounds, and done everything she could to earn her place among them, despite her lack of a wolf. And now, they would take her son and tell her she did not belong. Hands closed around her arms. She had not realized other villagers had moved in behind her until they were pulling her away from Finn, dragging her backward while she fought and clawed and screamed. Her fingernails left bloody trails down someone's arm, but they did not let go. They were wolves, all of them, and she was only human. The outcome was never in doubt. "Finn!" His name ripped from her throat as the rogues moved forward, as gloved hands reached down and lifted her son from the mud where she had been kneeling. "Mama!" Finn's scream was pure terror now, his small arms reaching for her as the rogue turned and began walking back toward the tree line. "Mama, please! Do not let them take me! Mama!" Arya threw all her strength against the hands holding her, felt something in her shoulder tear as she twisted violently. It was not sufficient. The wolves holding her were too strong, their grips unbreakable, and all she could do was watch as the rogues carried her son away into the mist. The last thing she saw was his face, streaked with tears and dirt, those golden eyes wide with fear and confusion as he disappeared into the shadows between the trees. His cries echoed back to her, growing fainter with each passing moment, until finally there was only silence and the sound of her own ragged breathing. The hands released her. Arya collapsed forward onto her hands and knees, her vision swimming, her chest so tight she could not draw breath. This was not real. Could not be real. She would wake up in her small cottage with Finn curled beside her, warm and safe and alive, and this would all be just another nightmare. But the cold mud beneath her palms was real. The ache in her shoulder where she had torn something was real. The absolute emptiness where her son should be was devastatingly, horrifically real. She heard someone speaking her name, felt a hand try to help her up, but she could not process any of it. The world had narrowed to a single truth. They had taken her son. She had failed to protect him. She had stood there and let them steal the only thing in this world that mattered to her. Somewhere distant, someone was making a terrible sound, a low, keening wail that seemed to come from the earth itself. It took her several moments to realize the sound was coming from her own throat. Then the darkness rose up and claimed her, and she knew nothing more. Far to the south, in a stretch of ancient forest where the trees grew so thick that sunlight rarely touched the ground, Torsten Ironvale stood over the corpse of a deer and tried to remember the last time he had slept. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Time lost meaning when you spent every waking moment hunting monsters who wore human skin. He was a large man, built for war, with the kind of presence that made other wolves step aside when he passed. His black hair fell past his shoulders, held back from his face by a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed in the style favored by warriors of his line. Scars marked his arms and chest, each one a story, each one a reminder that survival came at a cost. But it was his eyes that truly set him apart. Golden like molten metal, ringed with black. They were the mark of the Alpha King, the one who ruled over all other alphas, the final authority in a world of wolves. Those eyes had seen too much death, too much suffering, too much failure. 12 children, 12 families destroyed over the course of 6 years. And he was no closer to finding them now than he had been when he started tracking the disappearances 3 weeks ago. The deer at his feet had been killed cleanly, its throat torn out by something with significant strength and precision. Rogue wolves, based on the scent markers they had left behind. They were growing bolder, ranging farther from their territory, taking risks they would not have dared a year ago. It spoke of desperation or confidence, and neither option sat well with him. Torsten knelt beside the carcass, studying the tracks in the soft earth. 4 wolves, possibly 5, moving northeast toward the mountain range that divided the territories. Fresh tracks, no more than a few hours old. If he pushed hard, he might be able to catch them before they reached whatever hole they were hiding in. He was reaching for his pack when he heard it. Faint and distant, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. A child crying. His wolf surged forward with such violence that Torsten barely managed to maintain control. The beast within him roared with rage and recognition, clawing at his mind, demanding to be released. He fought it down through sheer force of will, his hands curling into fists as his nails lengthened into claws before he could force them back to human shape. Not now. He needed to think, needed to track, needed to be the hunter and not the hunted. Shifting would give him speed, but cost him strategy, and strategy was what had kept him alive through 2 decades of war. He abandoned the deer and moved silently through the trees, following the sound of those cries. His senses expanded, catching threads of scent on the wind. Rogue wolves, multiple individuals, moving with purpose, and beneath that, something else, something that made his wolf react with even more fury than before. Blood. Human blood. Fresh. The trail led him to a section of forest where the undergrowth had been trampled by many feet. He found the marks easily, reading the story they told. A group of villagers had gathered here recently, perhaps at dawn based on the dew patterns. They had stood in a circle, had performed some kind of ceremony or exchange, and then they had left, all except for the rogues who had continued deeper into the forest. Torsten knelt and pressed his palm to a dark stain on the ground. His fingers came away red. He brought them to his nose, analyzing the scent. Female. Human. No wolf scent at all. She had fought, had torn her hands raw trying to hold on to something, and whoever had restrained her had not been gentle. A few feet away, he found smaller tracks, child-sized, bare feet pressing into the mud. The child had been standing here, had been taken from this spot, taken by the rogues, carried away while someone else's blood marked the place where a mother had fought and lost. The crying had stopped. That worried him more than if it had continued. Either the child had exhausted itself into silence, or the rogues had done something to quiet it. Neither option left room for hope. Torsten studied the trees around him, found a smooth-barked oak that would serve his purpose. He drew the long knife from his belt, the blade catching what little light filtered through the canopy, and began to carve. The letters came easily, cut deep into the living wood where they would not be missed by anyone who passed this way. Return the children, or die slowly. It was a promise and a threat, and a declaration of war all in one. He had spent 3 weeks tracking these rogues, watching them from the shadows, learning their patterns. No more watching, no more waiting. They had taken another child, and this time he had arrived close to the taking. This time, he would hunt them down before they could add another small corpse to their collection. If they had killed the children, he had to believe they had not. Had to believe that somewhere, somehow, those 12 missing children were still alive and waiting to be found. Because if they were dead, if he had spent 6 years searching for ghosts, then he would have to face the fact that he had failed them just as he had failed his own son all those years ago. Torsten sheathed his knife and turned to follow the rogue trail deeper into the forest. His wolf prowled just beneath his skin, eager for violence, hungry for vengeance. Soon, he promised the beast. Soon they would have their hunt. Behind him, carved into the oak tree, his message stood as a promise. The rogues would see it. They would know someone was coming for them. And when Torsten Ironveil finally caught up to them, they would learn that stealing children from an alpha king carried consequences that no amount of begging could prevent. The hunt had begun. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Trail. 2 days had passed since they took Finn, and Arya had not eaten, had not slept, had not done anything except move forward through the forest with single-minded determination that bordered on madness. She had waited until darkness fell on that first terrible night, until the village settled into uneasy sleep, and the guards posted at the perimeter grew careless with boredom. Slipping past them had been simple. They were watching for threats from outside, not for a grieving mother desperate to follow the trail of her stolen child. The rogues had not tried to hide their path. Why would they? They had the protection of ancient law, the weight of covenant behind them. No one would dare challenge the guardians of the seal, no matter what they took or where they went. They moved through the forest with the confidence of predators who knew themselves to be untouchable. But Arya was not trying to challenge them. She was only trying to follow, to keep that thread of connection alive for as long as she could bear it. To not let Finn disappear completely into the dark. The trail led northeast, deeper into the mountains where the trees grew thick and twisted with age. Arya knew these woods better than most. She had spent years ranging through them, gathering herbs for her remedies, learning which plants bloomed in shadow and which needed sun, where the streams ran clear and where they turned brackish with minerals from deep earth. That knowledge served her now as she picked her way through underbrush that would have stopped someone less familiar with the terrain. Her feet were bare beneath the hem of her woolen dress. She had not thought to bring proper traveling boots when she fled, had not thought of anything except the need to move. Now her soles were cut and bleeding from sharp stones and thorns. Each step a small agony she barely registered. Pain was distant, compared to the hollow ache in her chest, where her heart used to be. On the second morning, she found the camp. It sat in a small clearing ringed by ancient oaks, their branches reaching overhead to form a canopy that blocked most of the weak sunlight filtering down from the cloud-heavy sky. At first, Arya thought she had stumbled onto a butcher's yard. The ground was soaked dark with blood, the metallic scent of it thick in the cold air. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing, torn apart with such violence that it took her several long moments to count how many there had been. 5. 5 rogue wolves, all dead, all destroyed so thoroughly that she could barely distinguish one corpse from another. Arya pressed her hand over her mouth, fighting down the bile that rose in her throat. She had seen death before, had washed bodies for burial, had tended warriors who died of their wounds despite her best efforts. But this was different. This was not death in service of protection or survival. This was slaughter, brutal and complete. And yet the rogues had been armed, had clearly tried to fight back based on the defensive positions of some of the bodies. Whatever had done this to them had been faster, stronger, more skilled than 5 adult wolves fighting together. That should have been impossible. Movement near the edge of the clearing caught her eye. Arya froze, barely breathing, but it was only a raven settling onto a low branch to observe the carnage with the patient interest of a scavenger waiting for its meal. The bird cocked its head at her, eyes bright and knowing, then launched itself back into the air with a harsh cry that echoed through the trees. When her heartbeat slowed to something approaching normal, Arya forced herself to move closer. She was looking for signs of Finn, for any indication that he had been here, but the blood was too widespread and too mixed to tell if any of it belonged to a child. She found scraps of the heavy fur cloaks the rogues had worn, a broken blade, boot prints in the mud where someone had stood and fought and died. And on the largest oak at the clearing's edge, carved deep into the bark with something very sharp, she found words. "Return the children or die slowly." Arya traced the letters with trembling fingers. The cuts were fresh, made within the last day at most. Someone else was hunting the rogues. Someone with power substantial to kill 5 wolves and leave their bodies as warning to whoever might come after. Hope flickered in her chest. Painful and dangerous. If someone was demanding the return of children, that meant they believed the children were still alive. It meant Finn might still be alive. She clung to that thought, letting it steady her, giving her reason to keep moving when every part of her body screamed for rest. The trail continued beyond the massacre site, heading steadily northeast toward the heart of the mountain range. Arya followed. Far ahead of her, deeper in the forest where the trees grew so close together that their roots tangled and twisted into nets that caught the unwary, Torsten Ironvale stood over his latest kills and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No remorse. Nothing but the cold calculation of a hunter who had marked his prey and would not stop until every last one was dead or the children were returned. Preferably both. This had been the second group. 6 rogues this time, traveling in the open during daylight hours with the arrogance of wolves who believed themselves protected by covenant law. They had not expected an attack, had not posted proper sentries, had not taken even basic precautions against ambush. It had made killing them almost disappointingly easy. Torsten wiped his blade clean on one of the bodies, his movements efficient and methodical. The weapon was old, forged by his grandfather's smith, with a balance that made it feel like an extension of his arm, rather than a separate tool. He had killed more wolves with this blade than he cared to count, each death another mark against the tally of justice he kept in his mind. One of the rogues had been carrying a crude cage, small and mean, barely large enough for a child to curl up inside. Empty now, but the smell of fear and urine was still strong on the wood. They had moved their captive recently, perhaps only hours before Torsten caught up to them. He had been close, too close to turn back now. He found a tall pine near the center of the rogue camp and carved his message again, the words coming easily now after days of practice. The rogues would find this, would understand that someone was hunting them with the same relentless determination they had once used to hunt others, would know fear, perhaps for the first time in their miserable lives. The thought should have brought him satisfaction. Instead, it only reminded him of how many rogues remained, how many camps still needed to be found and cleared, how many children were still missing despite all his efforts. 12 children over 6 years. 13 now, with the one taken 2 days ago. And Torsten was no closer to understanding why they were being collected or where they were ultimately being held. The rogues he killed never had time to talk before they died, and even if they had, he doubted they would have told him anything useful. Rogues were loyal to their leaders, with the kind of fanatic devotion that came from having nothing else to believe in. He was gathering his gear to continue the hunt when he heard it. Footsteps, light and uneven, coming from the direction he had traveled earlier. Someone was following his trail. Someone human, based on the cadence of the steps, and injured based on the uneven rhythm. Torsten melted into the shadows between the trees and waited. She appeared a few minutes later, stumbling into the clearing with the exhausted determination of someone running on willpower alone. A woman, young, wearing a simple dress of rough-spun wool that had seen better days. Her feet were bare and bloody, her brown hair falling loose from its braid, her face pale with cold and hunger. She looked half dead already, and yet she kept moving, her green eyes scanning the carnage with a kind of desperate focus that spoke of someone looking for something specific. Someone looking for someone. Torsten watched as she made her way around the clearing, avoiding the bodies, her hands clutching at her skirts to keep them clear of the blood-soaked ground. She was searching, checking each corpse, looking for something she prayed she would not find. When she finally straightened, her shoulders sagging with relief, he understood. She was looking for a child, one of the missing children, and she had not found their body here, which meant there was still hope. The woman turned toward the tree where he had carved his latest message, her fingers reaching out to trace the letters. He saw her lips move as she read the words, saw the way her expression shifted from despair to something that might have been hope, or might have been delusion. It was hard to tell with humans. They were fragile creatures, easily broken by loss. She would die out here, Torsten knew. Even if the rogues did not find her first, the cold would, or hunger, or infection from those torn feet. She had perhaps another day before her body gave out completely, and then she would be just another corpse in the forest. Another failure he would carry with him. He should leave her, should continue his hunt, and let her fate be her own. He had learned long ago that saving everyone was impossible, that sometimes you had to choose between vengeance and mercy, and vengeance always served more people in the end. But as he watched her turn away from his message and start following the rogue trail again, limping now, barely able to walk, but still moving forward, something in his chest tightened. She reminded him of someone, of himself perhaps, back when he had first lost his son, back when grief was new and sharp and all-consuming, before it hardened into the cold rage that drove him now. Torsten stayed in the shadows and followed her, not interfering, not yet, but keeping pace as she struggled through the undergrowth. If she collapsed, he would carry her somewhere safe and continue alone. If the rogues found her first, he would kill them before they could add her to their collection. But until one of those things happened, he would simply watch and make sure she did not die alone and forgotten in the dark spaces between trees. It was the least he could do for someone who loved their child as fiercely as he had once loved his. By the third day, Arya had stopped feeling the cold. She knew that was dangerous, knew it meant her body was starting to shut down, but she could not seem to care. All that mattered was the trail, the faint marks in the earth and broken branches that showed where the rogues had passed. As long as she could follow, as long as she kept moving, she was still connected to Finn, still his mother, still fighting for him, even if that fight was nothing more than putting one ruined foot in front of the other. The landscape had changed as she climbed higher into the mountains. The trees here were older, stranger, their bark marked with symbols she did not recognize, and their branches reaching toward the sky in shapes that made her eyes hurt if she looked too long. The air itself felt different, heavier somehow, pressing down on her shoulders with invisible weight. She had found 2 more massacre sites since that first clearing, both identical in their brutality, both marked with the same carved message. The mysterious hunter was staying ahead of her, clearing the path, leaving bodies in his wake. She should have been grateful, but gratitude required energy she did not have. It was well past dark on the 3rd night when she heard the sound. Arya had been struggling through a particularly dense section of forest, her hands bleeding from clutching at thorny branches to keep her balance, when the howl cut through the darkness. Not a wolf's howl, though it started that way. This began as something recognizable and then twisted, climbing higher and higher until it became a shriek that vibrated in her bones and made her teeth ache. She froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, even though she had no strength left for running. The howl came again, closer this time, and beneath her feet the ground trembled. Small stones danced across the earth, falling into new patterns, and in the distance she heard the crack of wood as trees swayed and broke. Something was waking. Something old and angry and vast beyond comprehension. She could feel it in the air, in the sudden spike of wrongness that made her stomach clench with primal fear. This was not natural. This was not right. And somehow, she knew with terrible certainty that it was connected to the children, to Finn, to whatever the rogues had planned that made a mysterious hunter willing to slaughter entire camps to stop them. The earth trembled again, harder this time, and Arya fell to her knees in the mud. She pressed her palms flat against the cold ground and felt the vibrations running through stone and soil, felt the slow, inexorable movement of something massive stirring beneath layers of rock and time. The malediction. The curse the village elders spoke of in whispers. The beast that slept beneath the mountain and demanded tribute to stay dormant. It was waking. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, past the hunter's trail and the rogue camps, and all the blood spilled in this terrible game, her son waited. Alive or dead, she did not know, but waiting all the same. Arya pulled herself back to her feet. Her legs shook, her vision swam, but she took another step forward, and then another, following the trail that had become her entire world. Behind her, unseen in the shadows, Torsten watched her refuse to fall, and felt something he had not experienced in years, something that might have been respect, or might have been recognition, the acknowledgement that this human woman, powerless and broken and barely alive, possessed more strength than most wolves he had known. She would not survive much longer at this pace, but that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she was still moving, still fighting, and that was its own kind of victory against the dark. Chapter 3. The Temple Ruins. The fifth night found Torsten Ironvale crouched in the shadow of an ancient oak, his golden eyes fixed on the structure rising from the forest floor ahead of him. It was not truly a temple. Not anymore. Whatever sacred purpose it had once served had been lost to time and neglect, leaving only bones behind. Stone walls crumbled at their edges, their surfaces covered in moss and creeping vines that had slowly worked their way into every crack and crevice. The roof had collapsed in places, exposing wooden beams blackened by age and weather. Around the perimeter, crude wooden stakes had been driven into the earth at regular intervals, marking territory in the way rogues always did when they settled somewhere long-term. This was not a temporary camp. This was a stronghold. Torsten had been watching for 2 days now, memorizing patrol patterns and counting guards. The rogues were disciplined. He would grant them that much. They moved with military precision, their shifts changing at predictable intervals, their routes covering every approach to the temple with methodical care. Whoever led them had training, real training, not the chaotic violence that typically characterized rogue packs. That worried him more than he wanted to admit. In the center courtyard, visible through gaps in the crumbling walls, stood a series of wooden cages. Torsten had counted them carefully during his observation. 13 cages, each one barely large enough for a child to stand upright. And in those cages, small figures huddled against the cold. 13 children. Not just the one taken 2 days ago, but children collected over years. Tributes from multiple territories, stolen from families who thought they were maintaining an ancient covenant, never knowing their sons and daughters were being warehoused for some purpose darker than simple ransom. Torsten's hands clenched into fists as he watched a rogue guard pass close to one of the cages. A small hand reached through the bars, perhaps asking for water or warmth, and the guard kicked the cage hard before moving on. The child's cry was quickly muffled, probably by other children trying to keep them quiet to avoid further abuse. He wanted to attack now, wanted to shift into his full wolf form and tear through those rogues before they understood what was happening. But rage made wolves stupid, and stupid wolves died quickly. He forced himself to remain still, to observe, to plan. 13 children meant 13 lives, depending on him getting this right the first time. It was on the second day of observation, as dawn light began filtering through the canopy overhead, that Torsten finally got a clear view of one of the caged children. The boy was small, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, with brown hair that fell across his forehead in tangled waves. He sat curled in the corner of his cage, his arms wrapped around his knees, his face turned toward the morning light. And when he looked up, following the path of a bird flying overhead, Torsten felt his entire world tilt sideways. Golden eyes. The boy had golden eyes. Torsten's breath caught in his chest. Those eyes were impossible. They were the mark of the Alpha King bloodline, passed down through generations of Ironvale wolves. Only direct descendants carried that particular shade, that specific pattern of gold threaded through with black. He had seen those eyes every time he looked in a mirror, had watched them stare back at him from his father's face, and his father's father before that. But this child was not his. Could not be his. Torsten had never met the boy's mother, had never touched any woman from the territory where this child had been taken. And yet his wolf surged forward with sudden violent certainty, growling low in his mind. Ours, the beast insisted. Our son. Our blood. Ours. Torsten forced the wolf back down, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. It was impossible. Some trick of the light, perhaps, or wishful thinking by a creature who had lost its own pup years ago and never recovered from the grief. The boy simply had unusual eyes, that was all. A genetic quirk meaning nothing. Except wolves did not have genetic quirks when it came to eye color. Eye color was power made visible, bloodline marked in flesh. And those eyes belonged to his line. He shoved the thoughts aside with brutal efficiency. It did not matter who the boy was or where he came from. What mattered was getting all 13 children out alive before whatever the rogues had planned came to pass. He could sort out impossible questions later, after the killing was done. Torsten settled back into his hiding place and continued his surveillance, forcing his attention away from the golden-eyed child and back to the tactical situation. Patrols, weak points, optimal entry routes. These were things he understood, problems he knew how to solve. Everything else was just noise. On the 7th day, everything changed. Arya did not remember deciding to keep moving. She simply found herself putting one foot in front of the other, her body operating on some level beyond conscious thought. Hunger had become a distant ache, something happening to someone else. Cold had stopped registering hours ago. Pain was just another sensation, no more or less important than the feel of bark beneath her torn hands or the sound of her own ragged breathing. All that remained was the trail. Follow the trail. Find Finn. Nothing else mattered. When the trees finally thinned ahead of her, revealing glimpses of stone and shadow, Arya thought at first that she was hallucinating, but no, there it was. A structure rising from the forest floor, ancient and crumbling and surrounded by crude wooden stakes. Smoke rose from somewhere within its walls, and she could hear voices carrying on the still morning air. She had found them. Arya pressed herself against a tree trunk, her legs shaking so badly she could barely remain upright. She was here. Finn was in there somewhere, trapped with those rogues, and she had no idea what to do next. She had no weapons, no strength, no plan beyond the desperate need to see her son one more time. Through gaps in the temple walls, she caught glimpses of the courtyard beyond. Wooden cages arranged in neat rows, small figures huddled inside them. And there, in the third cage from the left, she saw him, Finn. Her son sat curled against the bars of his cage, his face turned toward a shaft of sunlight that had found its way through the broken roof above. He looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile, his clothes torn and dirty, but he was alive. He was breathing. He was there. Arya's vision blurred with tears she had thought herself too dehydrated to produce. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sob that tried to escape, her entire body shaking with the force of emotions she could not name. Relief and grief and desperate love all tangled together until she could not tell where one ended and another began. She had to get to him, had to find a way inside those walls, past those guards, through whatever defenses the rogues had established. It did not matter that she would die in the attempt. It did not matter that she had no chance of success. She was his mother, and mothers did not abandon their children no matter what the cost. Arya pushed away from the tree and took a step toward the temple ruins. Then another. Her feet left bloody prints in the mud, but she barely noticed. All her attention was fixed on that cage, on the small figure inside it, on the son she had failed to protect. She did not see the rogue patrol until they were almost on top of her. 3 wolves emerged from the tree line to her right, moving with the easy confidence of predators on familiar ground. They were in human form, but their eyes gleamed with wolf light, and the scent of them hit Arya a moment later. Rogue scent, wild and wrong, carrying notes of old blood and older anger. The lead rogue's eyes widened when he saw her. Then he smiled, and it was the smile of a hunter who had just spotted wounded prey. "Well now," he said. his voice carrying a rough accent she did not recognize. "What do we have here? A lost little human wandering where she does not belong." Arya tried to run, but her body had nothing left to give. She managed 3 stumbling steps before her legs gave out completely, dropping her to her knees in the mud. The rogues laughed, closing in from all sides, cutting off any escape route. This was how she would die. Not in her sleep surrounded by loved ones, not peacefully after a long life, but here in the mud, like an animal while her son remained caged just beyond her reach. The unfairness of it made her want to scream. The lead rogue reached for her, his hand closing around her arm with bruising force. Arya tried to pull away, but he was far too strong, his grip unbreakable. He dragged her to her feet, his face close to hers as he inhaled deeply. "You smell like desperation," he murmured, "like fear and grief and broken hope. Tell me, little human, what brings you to our territory? Are you looking for something? Please." Arya heard herself whisper, "My son. They took my son." The rogue's smile widened. "Did they now? And you thought you could just walk in and take him back? How delightfully stupid." He was raising his other hand, claws extending from his fingertips, when his head simply disappeared. One moment the rogue was standing there, grinning and cruel and very much alive. The next, his head was gone and his body was collapsing backward, blood spraying from the stump of his neck in a wide arc. The other 2 rogues barely had time to process what had happened before they died as well, throats torn out with surgical precision by something that moved too fast for Arya's human eyes to track. Then there was silence, broken only by the sound of her own gasping breaths and the soft drip of blood falling from leaves overhead. A figure stepped out of the shadows between the trees. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in blood that clearly did not belong to him. His black hair was pulled back in a warrior's braid, his beard neatly trimmed despite the violence he had just committed. And his eyes, when they met hers, were gold shot through with black. Ancient eyes that held depths of rage and grief that made her own suffering feel small by comparison. He raised one finger to his lips in a gesture so simple a child could understand it. "Be silent." Arya nodded mutely. She did not know who this man was, or why he had saved her, but she understood danger when she saw it. This was not someone to argue with or question. This was someone you obeyed if you wanted to continue breathing. The man moved with frightening silence, checking each body to ensure it was truly dead before wiping his blade clean on one of the rogue's cloaks. Then he turned back to Arya, his expression unreadable as he studied her torn feet, her bloody hands, her hollow cheeks. For just a moment, something that might have been recognition flickered across his face. His features were striking in a brutal sort of way, all sharp angles and hard lines, and there was something familiar about the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. She felt certain she had seen him before, or someone who looked very much like him, but the memory would not come clear through the fog of exhaustion clouding her mind. The man gestured toward a fallen log partially hidden by undergrowth. "Sit. Wait." The commands were clear even without words. Then he melted back into the shadows, leaving her alone with 3 corpses and a head full of questions she was too tired to voice. Arya sank onto the log and stared at the temple ruins ahead. Finn was still there, still caged, still waiting. And now there was a mysterious killer protecting her for reasons she did not understand. None of it made sense. But then again, nothing had made sense since the morning they took her son. She pressed her hands against her face and tried to think of what came next. Inside the temple courtyard, Voren Ironveil moved among the cages with the satisfied air of a man whose plans were finally coming together. He was identical to his brother in almost every way. The same black hair, the same warrior's build, the same golden eyes that marked their shared bloodline. But where Torsten's face carried the weight of grief and responsibility, Voren's showed only ambition barely restrained. And down the right side of his face, from temple to jaw, ran a burn scar that twisted his features into a permanent sneer, a gift from the elders who had tried to execute him for treason. They had failed, obviously, but the scar remained as reminder of how close he had come to death before his exile saved him. "Soon?" Voren murmured, running his hand along the bars of one cage. The child inside flinched away from his touch. "Very soon now. All the pieces will be in place. 13 cages. 13 children, each one carefully selected from territories across the region. Each one carrying a fragment of alpha blood in their veins, weak or strong but present nonetheless. It had taken 6 years to collect them all, 6 years of maintaining the fiction that he was simply continuing the ancient tribute system, while secretly gathering the keys that would unlock the seal, the beast beneath the mountain. The ancient horror his ancestors had bound with blood sacrifice and covenant law. Every alpha whispered stories about it, warned their packs about what would happen if the seal ever broke. But what those fools did not understand was that the beast could be controlled. The ritual texts were clear. 13 fragments of alpha blood, spilled on the seal stones at the moment when earth and sky aligned, would not just break the binding. It would transfer the binding to whoever performed the ritual, and whoever controlled the beast would control everything. Every territory, every pack, every wolf who valued their life would bow before him, or be devoured. Voren paused at the last cage, studying the small boy with golden eyes who had arrived just days before. This one was special. This one carried blood so pure, it practically sang with power. He had been searching for something like this child for years, and fate had finally delivered. You will be the final key, Voren told the boy softly. The 13th fragment, the one that makes all the others complete. The child stared back at him with those impossible eyes and said nothing. Perfect. Voren preferred his sacrifices silent. He turned away from the cages and moved toward the center of the courtyard where his lieutenant waited. They had much to prepare before dawn tomorrow, when the alignment would be perfect and the ritual could finally begin. High in the trees beyond the temple walls, Torsten listened to his brother's voice and felt cold certainty settle into his bones. He had been right to track these rogues, right to follow the trail of stolen children, right to trust his instincts even when the evidence seemed impossible. His brother was not just collecting tributes. Voren was preparing to unleash the one thing their people had feared for generations, and he had to be stopped, no matter what it cost. Tomorrow at dawn. That gave Torsten less than a day to plan an assault, extract 13 children, and kill his own brother before ancient evil was set loose upon the world. He looked back toward where he had left the human woman hiding. She would complicate things, but she had also earned the right to try saving her son, even if she died in the attempt. This was going to be the hardest fight of his life. But then again, the ones worth fighting usually were. Chapter 4. Blood and Destiny. Torsten found the woman where he had left her, slumped against the fallen log with her eyes closed and her breathing shallow. For a moment he thought she had died. That exhaustion and cold had finally claimed her. Then her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with startling clarity, despite everything her body had endured. "Who are you?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough with thirst and fatigue. Torsten crouched before her, studying her face in the dim light filtering through the canopy. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with the kind of worn beauty that came from surviving hardship. But it was her eyes that held his attention. Green, like new growth in spring, and filled with a determination that should not have existed in someone so close to death. "Someone who wants the same thing you want," he replied. "The children freed. My son." Her hands clenched into fists. "They took my son, almost 5 years old, brown hair, golden eyes." Torsten went very still. Golden eyes. Yes. She did not notice his reaction, too focused on her own desperate need to speak. "I saw him in the cages. Third one from the left. He looked so small, so frightened. I need to get to him. I need to tell him I am sorry for not protecting him, for letting them take him." The boy with golden eyes. Torsten repeated slowly. "He is your son, Finn. His name is Finn." Something in her expression cracked. "And I am Arya. Arya Frost. Widow. Wolfless. Completely useless except for gathering herbs and loving a child who deserves better than what I could give him." Torsten settled back on his heels, his mind racing through impossible connections. The boy in the cage with eyes matching his own bloodline. This woman claiming to be the mother despite having no wolf, no power, no logical connection to his family line. And yet his wolf had recognized that child. had insisted with absolute certainty that the boy belonged to them somehow. How? The word came out harder than he intended. How do you have a son with golden eyes when you possess no wolf yourself? Arya flinched at his tone but did not look away. I do not know. I have asked myself that question every day since he was born. My late husband had brown eyes. I have green. There is no one in either of our families who carried gold. And yet Finn was born with eyes like sunlight. Where was he conceived? Torsten pressed. Where were you when he was made? Color rose in Arya's pale cheeks. My husband had been dead for 8 months when I discovered I was with child. It should have been impossible. I thought perhaps I had miscounted the time, that grief had confused my memory, but the village healer confirmed it. Finn was conceived 3 months after my husband died. Torsten's jaw tightened. That is not an answer to my question. Where were you? What did you do that could have created a child when no man had touched you? Arya's eyes widened at his intensity, but she answered, There was only one place I went that was unusual. Only one thing that happened that I could not explain. She paused, gathering her thoughts. It was winter. Almost 5 years ago now. The snow was deep, and our stores were running low. I went into the forest looking for game, desperate for anything that would feed us through the cold months. And, Torsten prompted when she hesitated, I went too far, into the old growth where the elders always warned us not to venture. The trees there are ancient, twisted, covered in symbols I could not read. I found a clearing with stones arranged in a circle, and in the center, an altar, carved from a single piece of black rock. Torsten's blood ran cold. He knew that altar, had bled upon it himself. There was blood on the stones, Arya continued, her voice distant with memory. Fresh blood, still wet, and the symbols carved into the altar were glowing with golden light. I remember reaching toward them, feeling warmth radiating from the stone despite the winter cold. Then nothing. I woke 3 days later at the edge of the forest with no memory of how I got there. 3 days, Torsten murmured. You were missing for 3 days. Yes. And weeks later I realized I was carrying Finn. The village assumed I had laid with some passing stranger and lied about my husband's death. They never said it directly. But I saw the judgment in their eyes. The wolfless widow who birthed a golden-eyed bastard and expected them to accept it. Torsten stood abruptly, pacing away from her. His mind was connecting pieces of a puzzle he had never realized existed. The ritual he had performed almost 5 years ago in that exact clearing. The blood he had spilled on that exact altar. The magic that had demanded payment in ways he did not understand. What? Arya asked, watching him with growing concern. What is it? Do you know something about what happened to me? He turned back to face her, his expression carved from stone. Almost 5 years ago, I performed a ritual in that forest. On that altar. A forbidden working meant to break a curse that had plagued my bloodline for generations. Arya's breath caught. What kind of ritual? The kind that requires blood sacrifice from an alpha king. He watched her face carefully, looking for signs of recognition or understanding. The kind that demands payment the caster cannot predict. I was told the magic would take what it needed, that destiny would extract its price. I thought it meant I might die. I was willing to make that exchange. But you did not die, Arya whispered. No. I walked away unharmed. The curse was broken. But no woman I touched after that day ever conceived. No matter how many times I tried to continue my line. I thought the price was my fertility, my ability to create heirs. I accepted it as fair trade. I do not understand. Arya shook her head. What does your ritual have to do with Finn? Torsten knelt before her again, capturing her gaze with his own. You walked into that clearing while the magic was still active, while my blood was still fresh on the altar, and the spell was searching for a way to fulfill its purpose. You were pure of heart, desperate to provide for those you loved, and you touched the stones. Understanding dawned slowly across Arya's features, followed quickly by denial. No, that is impossible. You are saying Finn is yours? That magic somehow created him from your blood and my womb without us ever touching? I am saying Finn carries my bloodline despite having no biological connection to me. The magic took my essence, my power, and wove it into a child born from your body. He is not my son in the traditional sense, but he is of my blood. That is why he has my eyes. Why my wolf recognizes him as ours. Arya pressed her hands over her mouth, her entire body shaking. This cannot be real. Magic does not work this way. Children are not created by rituals and bleeding on stones. In our world, magic works exactly that way when the stakes are high and the price is unclear. Torsten gentled his voice, seeing her beginning to fracture. You asked how you could have a son with golden eyes when neither parent carried that trait. This is your answer. Destiny used us both to create something it needed. A child who carries Alpha King blood without being bound by traditional pack politics. Why? Arya demanded through her tears. Why would Destiny need such a child? What purpose could Finn possibly serve that required this impossible birth? Torsten's expression darkened. The man leading these rogues is my twin brother, Vorin Ironvale, exiled for treason and attempted murder. He has been collecting children with fragments of alpha blood for 6 years, waiting for the one child whose blood would be pure for his ritual. Finn, Arya breathed. He chose Finn as the 13th child because Finn carries your blood. The purest Alpha King blood that exists. Yes. Vorin knows about the ritual I performed. He was there when the elders warned me about unknown prices. He must have discovered what happened, must have traced the magic to its conclusion, and realized a child had been created. That is why he arranged for Finn to be taken as tribute. Your son is the key to whatever dark working my brother has planned. Arya tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. Torsten caught her before she fell, supporting her weight easily. She looked up at him, this stranger who had just claimed a mystical connection to her child, and saw truth written across his brutal features. You said you want the children freed, she said quietly. Can you do it? Can you save Finn before your brother uses him in this ritual? I will save him or die trying. The words were a vow, absolute and unbreakable. But I need you to tell me truthfully whether you can fight. I cannot protect you and assault that temple at the same time. I can fight. Arya's voice was steady, despite her tears. I have already killed tonight. I watched you slaughter those rogues and I did not flinch. Whatever needs to be done to save my son, I will do it. Just tell me how. Torsten studied her for a long moment, weighing her determination against her obvious physical limitations. Then he nodded once. Decision made. Then we prepare. My brother plans to perform his ritual at dawn tomorrow. That gives us less than a day to teach you enough to keep yourself alive and coordinate an assault that has almost no chance of success. Almost no chance is better than none, Arya said, spoken like someone who has already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. I have Finn left to fear for. That is more than enough. Torsten found himself almost smiling at her fierce response. This human woman with no power and no training had more courage than most wolves he had commanded in battle. She would probably die tomorrow when they attacked the temple, but she would die fighting for her son, and there was honor in that kind of death. He helped her to a more sheltered location, built a small fire, and began the work of teaching a grieving mother how to become a warrior in the span of a single night. Chapter 5. Alliance and Preparation. Torsten found shelter in a shallow ravine less than a mile from the temple ruins, where overhanging rocks formed a natural roof and thick moss muffled sound. He built no fire. Smoke would draw attention they could not afford. But he had water from a nearby stream and dried meat in his pack. Not much, but it would keep them alive through the night. Arya sat with her back against the stone wall, drinking from the water skin he offered. Color had begun returning to her face, though exhaustion still lined every feature. Her feet were wrapped in strips torn from his spare tunic. The bleeding finally stopped, but the damage severe. We have perhaps 8 hours until dawn, Torsten said, settling across from her. My brother will perform his ritual at first light. That is when the alignment he needs will be strongest. Then we attack before dawn, Arya said, her voice stronger than it had been. We get the children out while it is still dark. We? Torsten raised an eyebrow. You can barely walk. I can move well enough to follow a tunnel and open cage doors. Her jaw set stubbornly. That is all I need to do. He studied her in the dim light filtering through the rocks. Most humans would have died already from what she had endured. Most wolves too. But she sat there planning an assault on a rogue stronghold as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Tell me about Finn," he said abruptly. "When was he born? Where exactly were you when you conceived him?" Arya blinked at the change of subject, but answered, "He was born in early spring, almost 5 years ago. As for conception," she paused, clearly uncomfortable. "My husband had been dead 8 months when I realized I was carrying a child. It should have been impossible. But you went somewhere," Torsten pressed. "Did something. Think carefully." She closed her eyes, reaching back through memory. It was deep winter, the worst in years. Our stores were nearly empty and people were starving. I went into the old forest looking for game, went farther than I should have. I found a clearing with standing stones and an altar carved from black rock. Torsten's entire body went rigid. What did the altar look like? Ancient, covered in symbols I could not read. And there was blood on it, fresh blood that steamed in the cold air. The symbols were glowing gold. Her eyes opened, meeting his. I touched the stone. I remember feeling warmth spread through me. Remember thinking it was the first time I had been truly warm in weeks. Then nothing. I woke 3 days later, at the edge of the forest, with no memory of how I got there. 3 days. Torsten breathed. "You were missing for 3 days." "Yes." The village assumed I had gotten lost, nearly frozen. No one believed me when I said I could not remember. She leaned forward. "Why? What does this mean?" Torsten stood and paced the small space, his mind working through connections that should not exist. "Almost 5 years ago, I performed a forbidden ritual in that same clearing, on that same altar. I was trying to break a curse on my bloodline. Generations of my family had struggled to produce heirs. The ritual required blood sacrifice from an alpha king, spilled voluntarily under specific conditions." Arya's breath caught. "Your blood, the blood I saw on the altar." I completed the ritual and left, thinking I had paid the price. But afterward, no woman I was with ever conceived. I thought the magic had made me sterile as payment for breaking the curse. He turned to face her fully. But magic does not work that way. It does not simply take. It transforms. It redirects. "Are you saying—" Arya could not finish the sentence. "I am saying the magic took my blood, my essence, and used your body as a vessel to create what I could not create naturally. Finn is not my biological son, but he carries my bloodline. That is why he has my eyes. Why my wolf recognizes him as mine despite us never having met before today." Arya pressed her hands over her mouth, shaking her head. "That is impossible. Magic cannot create life from nothing. It did not create from nothing. It wove together what already existed. My power, your strength, the desperation that drove us both to that clearing. Destiny needed a child who carried Alpha King blood, but was not bound by pack politics or traditional succession. So it made one." "Why?" Arya whispered. "Why would Destiny need such a child? Because my brother Vorin knows about powerful bloodlines. He has been collecting children with fragments of alpha blood for years, but he needed one pure source to complete his ritual. When he discovered what the magic had created, he arranged for Finn to be taken as tribute." Torsten's voice hardened. "Your son is the key to unleashing the beast beneath the mountain. That is why Vorin chose him specifically as the 13th child." Arya stood despite her injured feet, swaying slightly. "Then we get him out. Tonight. Before your brother can use him. We will try," Torsten agreed. "But you need to understand the plan and your role in it. Come." He led her to a flat section of stone and drew his knife, using the tip to scratch rough lines in the dirt accumulated there. A circle for the temple courtyard, rectangles for walls, small squares representing cages. "There are 3 ways into the ruins," he explained. "The main gate, which is always guarded, a side entrance blocked by rubble, and tunnels beneath the structure that the rogues use for storage." Arya leaned closer, studying his crude map. "The tunnels. Can I fit through them?" "Barely. But yes. I watched rogues bringing supplies up from below. They have an entrance here." He marked a spot beyond the outer wall. "If you can reach the children through the tunnels and guide them to safety, you will have done more than any warrior could manage in open combat." "And you?" She looked up at him. "I attack from the front, Draw every rogue in that place to me, including my brother. Make so much noise and violence that no one thinks to check on the prisoners below." His expression was grim. "It is the only way to give you time. You will be outnumbered. I have been outnumbered before." He tapped another point on his map. "There is a cave approximately half a mile west of the tunnel entrance. Small, hidden, defensible. If you can lead the children there and keep them quiet, they will be safe while I finish what needs to be done above." Arya traced the route with one finger. "And if you cannot finish it? If your brother wins? Then you run with those children as far and as fast as you can. You do not look back. You do not try to help me. You save them and yourself." His golden eyes locked on hers. "Promise me." "I cannot promise that." "You will, or I leave you here and do this alone." His voice was hard as stone. "Those children need someone to survive this, Arya. They need you to be practical, not heroic." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she would never abandon him after everything. But when she looked at his face, she saw he meant every word. And deeper than that, she saw he was right. "I promise," she said quietly. "If you fall, I run with the children." He nodded once, satisfied. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out a hunting bow. Shorter than a warrior's weapon, but well made. "You said you have hunted before. Can you use this?" Arya took the bow, testing its weight and draw. "For deer and rabbits, yes. For people," she trailed off. "The motion is the same. The target is simply different." He handed her a quiver with a dozen arrows. "You will not win a battle with this, but you can defend the children if a lone rogue finds you. Aim for the throat or the eye, anywhere else, and they will heal too quickly to matter." She swallowed hard but nodded, slinging the quiver over her shoulder. For the next several hours, Torsten taught her what he could: how to move silently through confined spaces, how to count children quickly in darkness, how to recognize the difference between wolf footfalls and human ones, how to shoot when her hands were shaking and her vision blurred with tears. He made her practice with the bow until her arms trembled, until 3 arrows out of 5 struck close to the mark he had carved in a tree. It was not enough, would never be enough, but it was something. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they sat together in silence. Arya could feel exhaustion pulling at her, demanding she sleep. But fear kept her awake, fear of what would come at dawn, fear that she would fail the children, fear that she would lose Finn again just when hope had been rekindled. "He has your eyes," she said quietly. "Finn, when he looks at me, I see gold. I never understood why until now." Torsten's jaw tightened. He should have had a normal childhood. Should have been safe. "He will be safe," Arya said with fierce certainty. "Because we will make it so." The Alpha King looked at her, this human woman with no power beyond her refusal to surrender, and felt something shift in his chest. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition of a kindred spirit. Someone who had lost everything and still found the strength to fight. "Get some rest," he said gruffly. "You will need your strength in a few hours. What about you?" "I do not need rest. I need to remember every detail of that temple's layout before I tear it apart stone by stone." Arya wanted to argue, but her body had reached its limit. She curled against the wall, pulled her torn cloak tight, and let her eyes drift closed. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Finn's face, of golden eyes looking up at her with trust she prayed she would not betray. Torsten watched her sleep for a moment, then moved to the edge of their shelter and stared out at the dark forest beyond. Somewhere in that direction, his brother was preparing a ritual that would unleash ancient evil upon the world. Somewhere in those ruins, 13 children waited in cages for a fate they could not understand. And at dawn, everything would be decided by blood and steel, and whatever scraps of mercy the old gods still possessed. He flexed his hands, felt his claws extend and retract. The beast within him was restless, eager for the violence to come. Soon, he promised it silently. Soon, we hunt. The night wore on toward morning, and the forest held its breath. Chapter 6. Blood and Chaos. The tunnel was narrower than Arya had imagined, the walls pressing close on either side as she crawled forward on hands and knees. The bow strapped across her back kept catching on jutting stones. forcing her to stop and adjust her position in the suffocating darkness. Behind her, somewhere above ground, Torsten was preparing to unleash hell on the temple gates. Before her, somewhere in this maze of ancient passages, 13 children waited in cages for a dawn that would end their lives. She counted her breaths to keep panic at bay. 30 paces to the first turn, Torsten had said. Keep right at each fork. The air grew colder as she descended, carrying the smell of damp earth and something older, something that made her skin crawl with instinctive dread. Her fingers found the edge of the first junction. Right. She turned and kept crawling. The tunnel widened slightly, giving her room to rise to a crouch. In the distance, she heard the muffled sound of voices, the scrape of boots on stone. Guards, she realized. She was getting close to the storage chambers beneath the courtyard. Arya pressed herself against the wall and crept forward until she could see torchlight flickering through an iron grate set into the floor ahead. She waited, listening to the rhythm of the guards' conversation, waiting for the moment when both would be distracted. Above ground, chaos erupted. The sound of Torsten's attack was unmistakable even through layers of stone. A howl so deep and primal it seemed to shake the mountain itself, followed by screams and the clash of weapons. The guards in the chamber below went rigid, then ran toward the stairs leading up to the courtyard, shouting orders to each other as they disappeared from view. Arya moved. She reached the grate, found the section Torsten had loosened during his earlier reconnaissance, and wrenched it aside with strength born of desperation. The metal screamed, but the sound was lost in the larger chaos above. She dropped through the opening and landed in the storage room, her injured feet screaming protest that she ignored. The stairs. Where were the stairs? She found them in the corner, a narrow spiral leading upward. The bow came off her back, an arrow knocked before conscious thought. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be as she climbed toward the sounds of battle. The passage at the top opened onto a walkway overlooking the cages. Arya's heart lurched. There they were. 13 small figures huddled in wooden cells, some crying, others silent with shock. And there, in the third cage, with those impossible golden eyes looking up at the chaos with fear and confusion, was Finn. 2 guards remained at their posts near the cages, torn between maintaining their duty and joining the fight that raged somewhere beyond her sight. One kept glancing toward the courtyard entrance where the sounds of slaughter echoed. The other stared at the children, hand on his sword hilt, as if considering whether killing them quickly might be kinder than whatever fate awaited. Arya drew the bowstring to her cheek and released in one smooth motion. The arrow took the first guard in the throat. He fell without a sound, hands clutching uselessly at the shaft protruding from his neck. The second guard spun, saw her standing in the shadows, saw his companion dying, and reached for his weapon. She had already knocked her second arrow. This one struck him in the chest, but not deep. He was wearing leather armor beneath his cloak, and the arrow deflected, tearing a gouge across his shoulder instead of punching through to his heart. He roared and charged up the walkway toward her, sword raised. Arya dropped the bow and drew her knife, knowing it was inadequate, knowing she was about to die but determined to take him with her if she could. He was twice her size, trained in combat, fueled by rage and adrenaline. She was exhausted, half-starved, running on nothing but desperation. He swung. She ducked under the blade and drove her knife upward, aiming for the soft flesh beneath his jaw. The blade sank into the hilt and he staggered, blood pouring from the wound. His fist caught her across the face, sending her sprawling, stars exploding across her vision. He raised his sword for a killing blow. A small stone struck him in the temple, then another, then a dozen more, as the older children in the nearest cages threw whatever they could reach through the bars. The guard turned, distracted for just a moment, and Arya swept his legs out from under him. He crashed down hard, head striking stone, and went still. Arya dragged herself upright, spitting blood. "Keys," she gasped. "Where are the keys?" One of the children pointed at the dead guard near the cages. Arya stumbled down the walkway, pulled the heavy iron ring from his belt, and began unlocking doors. "Quiet," she whispered urgently, as frightened children spilled out of their prisons. "We have to be very quiet and very fast. Stay together." Hold on to each other. Do not let go. She reached Finn's cage last. His eyes widened as she wrenched open the door and pulled him into her arms, holding him so tightly he made a small sound of protest. "Mama," his voice was tiny, disbelieving. "You came? I will always come for you," she whispered against his hair. Always. Above them, the sounds of battle had changed. The clash of steel had given way to something more visceral. The snarls of wolves, the wet sounds of tearing flesh. Torsten was no longer fighting as a man. "We go now," Arya said, forcing herself to release Finn but keeping hold of his hand. She counted the children quickly, 13, all present, and began herding them toward the stairs. The oldest was perhaps 6, the youngest barely 3. They moved slowly, stumbling over each other in their fear and exhaustion. The tunnel seemed impossibly long on the return journey, made worse by the need to keep the children moving forward in near total darkness. Arya positioned the older ones at intervals, each holding the hand of a younger child, creating a chain that stretched back through the passage. She led from the front with Finn pressed against her side, one hand trailing along the wall to navigate the turns. Twice they had to stop when one of the smaller children began to cry. Twice Arya had to crouch and whisper reassurances, promising safety, promising food and warmth and their mothers, anything to keep them quiet and moving. Behind them, the sounds of fighting grew more distant, but also more terrible. Howls of pain, the splintering of wood and stone, and underneath it all, a deeper sound that made the tunnel walls vibrate. Something ancient stirring. Something that should have remained asleep. They emerged from the tunnel into gray pre-dawn light. The cave Torsten had described sat 50 yards away across open ground, its entrance partially hidden by fallen logs and thick undergrowth. Arya made the children wait at the tunnel mouth, while she ran ahead to check that the cave was truly empty. It was small but dry, the ceiling high enough for even the tallest child to stand. Old ash marked where someone had made fires long ago. Animal bones were scattered near the back, but no fresh scent of predators. It would serve. She returned and guided the children across the open ground in groups of 3, then 4, then the final 6. By the time she got them all inside the cave and positioned behind a natural rock formation that hid them from casual view, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to Finn. "Stay here," she whispered to the oldest girl, who looked barely old enough to have lost her first tooth. "Do not make noise. Do not light fires. If I do not come back by full daylight, take them and run west. Find the nearest village and tell them what happened." "Where are you going?" the girl asked. Arya looked back toward the temple, where smoke was beginning to rise into the pale sky. "To make sure the monster does not follow you." She left before any of them could protest, bow in hand, moving back through the trees toward the sounds of destruction. The temple courtyard had become an abattoir. Bodies lay scattered across the stone, torn apart with a violence that defied description. Blood painted the walls in great arcing splashes, and the air was thick with the copper tang of it mixed with the darker scents of spilled bowels and fear. In the center of the carnage, 2 massive wolves circled each other. Arya recognized Torsten by his size and the midnight black of his fur. The other wolf was identical in build, but marked down one side of its face with an old burn that twisted the flesh beneath gray and white coat. Vorin, the brother, the one who had orchestrated all of this horror. They moved with the terrible grace of apex predators, each looking for an opening in the other's defense. Blood matted both their coats, whether their own or their enemies'. Arya could not tell from this distance. As she watched, Vorin lunged. Torsten twisted away, but not fast enough. Claws raked across his shoulder, tearing through muscle and laying bone bare. He snarled, but the sound was weaker than it should have been. He was tiring, she realized with horror. He had fought through dozens of rogues to reach his brother, and the cost was showing. Vorin circled closer, sensing victory. His jaws opened, showing teeth designed to crush bone. Arya's arrow took him in the eye. The shaft sank deep, punching through socket and into whatever lay beyond. Vorin's head snapped back with the impact, a howl of pain and rage tearing from his throat. He spun toward where she stood at the edge of the courtyard, his remaining eye fixing on her with such hatred that her knees nearly buckled. Then Torsten was on him. While Voren was distracted by pain and fury, his brother crashed into him from the side, jaws closing around his throat. They went down together in a tangle of fur and teeth and desperate violence. The ground beneath them trembled. Cracks appeared in the ancient stone of the courtyard floor, spreading outward in jagged lines. From somewhere deep below, that terrible howl rose again. The beast, the sealed thing, responding to the blood that had been spilled, to the ritual that had been interrupted but not stopped. The seal was breaking. Arya saw Voren go limp in Torsten's jaws, saw the Alpha King tear his brother's throat out in one savage motion. But victory came at a cost. The trembling grew stronger, the cracks wider. Something massive was rising from beneath the temple ruins, drawn by death and blood and the promise of freedom after centuries of imprisonment. Torsten shifted back to human form, his body covered in wounds, blood streaming from a dozen gashes. He staggered toward Arya, his golden eyes fierce despite his injuries. "Run," he said, his voice rough and broken. "Take the children and run. The seal is breaking. I cannot stop what comes next alone." "Then do not be alone," Arya replied, stepping forward to support his weight. "Tell me what needs to be done." He looked at her, this human woman who had followed him into hell for a child who was hers, and his, and something more than either, and made a decision. "The altar," he said. "We have to reach the altar beneath the temple before the beast emerges fully. We have to complete the sealing ritual properly this time." "How?" His expression was grim. "With blood, with sacrifice, with everything we have left." The earth split open behind them with a sound like the world ending, and from the darkness below, something vast and hungry began to climb toward the light. Chapter 7. The Sealing. The beast that tore itself from beneath the temple was older than the stones, older than the covenant, older than any living memory could contain. It rose through the shattered courtyard floor with 3 massive heads, each one a twisted fusion of wolf and serpent, fangs like swords and eyes that held nothing but endless, patient hunger. Scales covered its necks and body in overlapping black armor, while patches of matted fur clung to rotting flesh beneath. The creature was enormous, easily the size of 3 houses stacked one atop another, and when it moved, the ground shook. Torsten staggered, blood streaming from dozens of wounds across his chest and arms. Voren lay dead at his feet, throat torn out, but the victory felt hollow as the earth cracked wider, and the beast pulled itself fully into the dawn light. "The altar," Torsten gasped, grabbing Arya's arm. "We have to reach the altar beneath the temple before that thing destroys everything." Arya's mind raced. "The children. Finn is in the cave. They are all in the cave. They will be safe if we stop this now." His golden eyes burned with desperate intensity. "The seal can be remade, but we need to move." The beast's central head swung toward them, nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. It opened jaws wide enough to swallow a horse and released a sound that was not quite a roar, not quite a shriek, something that made Arya's bones ache and her vision swim. They ran. Through crumbling archways and collapsed passages they went, Torsten leading despite his injuries. Behind them, the beast followed with terrible deliberation, each footfall sending tremors through stone. It was not rushing. It had waited centuries for freedom. A few more minutes meant nothing. The passage down was narrow, barely wide enough for Torsten's shoulders. Ancient steps worn smooth by countless feet led them deep beneath the ruins to a chamber Arya had not known existed. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight, and at the center stood an altar of black stone. The same altar where Arya had once touched glowing blood and conceived a child she should not have been able to bear. "This is where it started," she whispered. "And where it ends." Torsten drew his knife, the blade still slick with his brother's blood. The ritual that sealed the beast originally required 3 bloodlines: king, vessel, and heir. 3 sources of power binding the darkness beneath the mountain. Arya's breath caught. "King, vessel, heir. I am the king," Torsten said. "You are the vessel who carried my bloodline without bearing my child through natural means. And Finn? Finn is the heir." Arya finished, horror and understanding warring in her chest. You cannot mean to use him in this ritual. He is a child. I mean to save him and every other child in these mountains. Torsten's voice was hard as iron. The beast will not stop until it has consumed everything. Towns, villages, entire territories. It will feed until nothing remains, unless we bind it again. Now, tonight. Above them, stone groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling as massive weight pressed down on the ruins. How? Arya demanded. What does the ritual require? Blood on the altar, willingly given, from all three. He met her eyes. Your son will not die from this, I swear it. But he needs to be here. His blood is the key that completes what destiny started 5 years ago. Arya wanted to refuse, wanted to run back to that cave, gather Finn in her arms and disappear into the forest where ancient rituals and cursed beasts could not touch them. But she looked at Torsten's face, at the desperation and determination written there, and she knew running would accomplish nothing. The beast would hunt them down eventually, would hunt all of them down. I will get him, she said. But if you are lying, if this kills my son, I will find a way to make you regret it, in whatever hell waits for us both. I would expect nothing less. Arya turned and ran back up the passage, leaving Torsten alone with the altar and the sounds of destruction growing closer overhead. Her feet carried her through corridors she barely remembered, following instinct more than memory. When she finally burst out into open air, the temple ruins were collapsing in earnest. The beast had pulled itself fully free now, 3 heads raised toward the sky as it unleashed another of those bone-shaking cries. The cave was just visible through the trees. Arya ran faster than she had ever run in her life. The children huddled at the back of the cave exactly where she had left them, the older ones holding the younger. All of them wide-eyed with terror at the sounds echoing from the temple. Finn sat near the front, his golden eyes tracking her approach. Mama? His voice was small. Arya dropped to her knees and pulled him close. I need you to be very brave for me. Can you do that? He nodded against her shoulder. We have to go back. You and me. There is a ritual that will stop the monster, but it needs all 3 of us. Me, you, and the man who saved us. Do you understand? Will it hurt? The question broke her heart. A little. But only for a moment. And then it will be over, and you will be safe. Finn pulled back enough to look at her face. Those impossible eyes that matched Torsten's studied her with a wisdom no child should possess. Will you be there? Every moment. I will not leave you. Then I am not afraid. Arya gathered him up and looked at the oldest girl. Stay here until full light. If we do not return by then, take them west to the nearest village. Tell them what happened. Someone will help you. The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. Arya carried Finn back through the forest, back through the dying ruins, back down into darkness where Torsten waited at the altar. The Alpha King's face was gray with blood loss, but his hands were steady as he drew the knife across his palm. Blood welled and dripped onto the black stone, which began to glow with that same golden light Arya remembered from 5 years ago. Your turn, he said quietly. Arya set Finn down, but kept hold of his hand. With her free hand, she took the knife and cut her own palm, letting her blood join Torsten's on the altar. The glow intensified, and now the air. Torsten knelt so he was eye level with Finn. This will sting, but only for a breath. Can you be brave? Finn looked at his mother. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He turned back to Torsten and held out his small hand. The knife was quick and careful. A shallow cut across the boy's palm, just deep enough to draw blood. Finn gasped, but did not cry out. Torsten guided his hand to the altar where his blood mixed with theirs. The world exploded into light. Gold and silver erupted from the altar, spiraling upward through stone and earth, wrapping around the 3 of them in bands of pure power. Arya felt it enter through the wound in her palm, felt it race through her veins like liquid fire. She heard Torsten's sharp intake of breath, saw Finn's eyes go wide with wonder rather than fear. Above them, the beast screamed. The power was pulling it back, dragging it down against its will. Arya could feel the creature's rage and confusion, could sense its desperate struggle against bindings that were reforming after centuries of freedom. But 3 bloodlines were stronger than one ancient horror. King and vessel and heir. woven together by magic that predated their civilization, were more than sufficient to restore what should never have been broken. The temple imploded. Stone and timber crashed inward, collapsing on itself, burying the beast beneath tons of rubble. But Arya saw through the chaos, saw the creature being pulled down through the floor, through the earth, back into whatever dark prison had held it before. The golden light from the altar formed chains that wrapped around necks and body, binding tighter with each passing second. The last thing Arya saw before the power faded was the beast's eyes, all 6 of them, fixing on Finn with something that might have been recognition, or might have been promise. Then it was gone, swallowed by stone and shadow, sealed once more beneath the mountain. The light died. Arya collapsed, Finn heavy in her arms. Torsten slumped against the altar, chest heaving. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the settling of dust from the collapsed temple above. "Is it done?" Arya finally whispered. "It is done," Torsten confirmed. His voice was rough but certain. "The seal will hold. Perhaps not forever, but long enough that our grandchildren's grandchildren will be old before they need worry about it breaking again." Finn stirred in Arya's arms. "Mama, I am tired. I know, my brave boy." She kissed his forehead, tasting salt and dust. "We can rest soon." They helped each other up the stairs, 3 people bound by blood and magic and shared terror, emerging from darkness into the pale light of a dawn that had almost been their last. The ruins of the temple stretched around them, nothing left standing but rubble and memory. In the distance, through the trees, Arya could see small figures emerging from the cave. The children, unable to wait any longer, were venturing out to see if the world had ended, or if somehow, impossibly, they had survived. Torsten raised his hand in a gesture that might have been greeting or benediction. The children saw him and began to run. 12 small bodies racing across open ground toward the adults who had saved them. Arya sank to the ground, still holding Finn, and let herself cry for the first time since this nightmare began. Tears of grief for all they had lost. Tears of relief for all they had saved. Tears of exhaustion, because finally, it was over. Torsten stood watch over them all. The Alpha King who had lost a brother and gained a family in the space of a single terrible night, and waited for the sun to finish rising over a world that would never know how close it had come to ending. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 3 days passed before Arya could stand without her legs threatening to give out beneath her. She woke in an improvised camp half a mile from the ruined temple, Finn curled against her side beneath a rough wool blanket someone had donated. Around them, the rescued children slept in small clusters, the older ones keeping watch over the younger with a protectiveness that made Arya's chest ache. They had all survived. Against impossible odds, all 13 had made it through the night. Torsten sat near the fire, his wounds bound with strips torn from someone's cloak. He looked worse than she felt, pale beneath his tan, moving carefully to avoid reopening the gashes across his chest and arms. But he was alive, and the set of his shoulders suggested he intended to stay that way. "The patrols will arrive soon," he said when he noticed her watching. Word spread quickly about what happened here. Every pack within 3 days' travel is sending representatives. Arya pulled Finn closer, suddenly anxious. What will they want? Answers, assurances. Some will want to verify their children are truly safe. His golden eyes found hers across the fire. And they will want to know who is responsible for ending a threat that has haunted these mountains for generations. She understood what he was not saying. The politics would begin now, the careful navigation of pack hierarchies and territorial claims. She had no standing in that world, no voice that anyone would respect. She was still just Arya Frost, wolfless widow, who had somehow survived what should have killed her a dozen times over. "I am taking Finn home," she said quietly. "Back to our village. We will rebuild our lives there. That village sold him to rogues," Torsten replied, his tone flat. "The beta who chose him as tribute still lives there. Do you truly believe they will welcome you back? It is all we know. Then learn something new." He stood, wincing at the movement, and crossed to where she sat. "Come with me to my kingdom. You and Finn both. I am offering you a place that does not depend on having a wolf or a husband or anything, except the fact that you earned it through blood and courage. Arya wanted to refuse. Wanted to insist they would manage on their own as they always had. But when she looked at Finn's sleeping face, at the fragility of his small frame, despite the power that ran through his veins, she knew Torsten was right. Going back to that village would be walking into a life of whispers and sideways glances, of people who would always remember that she had been deemed worthless. What place could I possibly have in an Alpha King's court? She asked. Mother of my heir, Torsten said simply. Not Luna. I am not asking you to be my maid or my wife. But Finn carries my bloodline whether we intended it or not. That makes him my responsibility, and you are his mother. The court will accept you because I command it, and in time they will respect you, because you have proven yourself worthy of respect. And if I refuse, then I will ensure you and Finn have everything you need to build a life elsewhere. Land, resources, protection from anyone who might think to use you against me. But I am asking you not to refuse. We are bound together now, the three of us. The ritual saw to that. Fighting against it will only make all our lives harder. Before Arya could respond, voices rose from the direction of the forest. The patrols had arrived. Over the next several hours, chaos transformed into something resembling order. Wolves from multiple territories converged on the camp, some in human form, others prowling the perimeter in beast shape. Mothers and fathers who had lost children in previous tributes wept openly when they found their sons and daughters alive. Others demanded explanations, wanted to know who had authorized the attack, who would pay for the destruction of the temple and the violation of the ancient covenant. Torsten handled them all with the calm authority of someone born to command. He explained about Vorin, about the ritual that would have unleashed the beast, about the seal that now held stronger than before, because it had been remade with willing sacrifice rather than coerced tribute. Some believed him immediately. Others required convincing. Through it all, Arya sat with the children and made sure they were fed and warm and as comfortable as circumstances allowed. She watched Torsten navigate pack politics with an ease she could never hope to match, and she understood for the first time what it truly meant to be an Alpha King. It was not just strength or fighting prowess. It was this: the ability to stand before hostile strangers and convince them that cooperation served their interests better than conflict. By evening, a consensus had formed. The old tribute system would end. The temple would remain in ruins as warning and memorial both, and Torsten would take responsibility for the children who had no families to return to, finding them places in his kingdom where they would be safe and valued. No one challenged him. No one dared. When the last of the visiting wolves had departed, Torsten returned to where Arya sat with Finn. The boy was awake now, watching everything with those unsettling golden eyes that marked him as other, as special, as dangerous. "We leave at dawn," Torsten said. "The journey to my kingdom will take 2 weeks on foot. I have sent riders ahead to prepare rooms and provisions." "Rooms," Arya repeated. Plural. "Did you think I would house the mother of my heir in a servant's quarter?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You will have chambers in the royal wing. Finn will train with my warriors when he is old enough. And you," he paused, considering, "you will do whatever you wish. Hunt, train, advise me on matters of justice. I have seen what you can do when given the chance. I would be a fool not to use those skills." Arya looked at Finn, then back at Torsten. 2 weeks ago, her entire world had been that small village, and the desperate hope that she could protect her son from the cruelty of people who saw him as disposable. Now she was being offered a place at the side of the most powerful wolf in the region, not as a concubine or decoration, but as someone with actual value. "I accept," she said quietly. "But I have conditions. Name them." "Eldrick, the beta who chose Finn as tribute will be punished. I want him stripped of his position and exiled from his pack. I want the territory he controlled redistributed to families who lost children to the old system." Torsten's smile widened. "Done. What else?" "I want to learn properly. Fighting, tactics, everything you know about survival. I never want to feel helpless again. I will assign my best instructors, Anything else? Arya hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been building in her chest since the ritual. I want you to teach Finn what it means to be your heir. Not just the fighting and the politics, but the responsibility, the weight of making decisions that affect others. I want him to understand that power is not something you use for yourself. It is something you carry for those who cannot carry it themselves. Something shifted in Torsten's expression, a softening around his eyes that suggested she had touched something deep. I will teach him everything I know, and perhaps he will teach me things I have forgotten. The journey north was long, but uneventful. They traveled with an escort of Torsten's personal guard, wolves who had served him for years, and accepted Arya and Finn without question, because their king had claimed them as his. The children walked in the middle of the formation, protected on all sides, slowly losing the haunted looks that had marked them in the immediate aftermath of their rescue. Finn grew stronger with each passing day. Good food and safety worked their magic, filling out his frame and bringing color back to his cheeks. He asked questions constantly, about the plants they passed, about the wolves in their escort, about the kingdom they were traveling toward. Torsten answered every question with patience that surprised Arya, treating the boy not as a burden, but as someone worth his time and attention. On the 10th day, they crested a hill and saw it spread before them. Torsten's kingdom. A fortress built into the mountainside, surrounded by smaller villages and farms, with trade roads running in all directions. It was larger than anything Arya had imagined, a reminder that the world beyond her small village was vast and varied, and full of possibilities she had never been given the chance to explore. Home, Torsten said simply. The court received them with formal ceremony that made Arya uncomfortable. She had never been the focus of so much attention. Never had people bow and speak titles she did not feel she had earned. But Torsten stood beside her through all of it, his presence a steady anchor, and gradually she found her footing. The title, Mother of the Heir, turned out to carry more weight than she had expected. Pack members sought her opinion on matters of justice, particularly cases involving children or families. She discovered she had a talent for seeing through lies and finding fair solutions to problems that had seemed intractable. Torsten began bringing her to council meetings, valuing her perspective even when it conflicted with his own. Finn thrived. He trained with boys twice his age and held his own through determination and the supernatural reflexes that came from whatever magic had created him. At night, he would sit with Torsten and listen to stories about the kingdom's history, about the responsibilities that came with power, about the difference between ruling through fear and ruling through earned respect. Months passed, then a year. Arya stood one morning on the balcony outside her chambers, watching Finn spar in the courtyard below. He was taller now, his movements confident, his golden eyes bright with concentration, as he practiced forms that would one day make him a formidable warrior. Torsten stood at the edge of the practice ground, offering corrections and praise in equal measure, and the sight made something warm settle in Arya's chest. They were not a traditional family. There was no mate bond, no wedding ceremony, no grand declaration of love, but they were family nonetheless, bound by blood and magic and shared trauma, by the choice to build something new, rather than remain trapped in old patterns that had never served them. Your Majesty, one of the court messengers approached, bowing respectfully. The delegation from the Western Territories has arrived. They wish to discuss the trade agreements you proposed. Arya smiled. Tell them I will receive them within the hour. As the messenger departed, Torsten appeared at her side. Still strange to hear people call you that? Every single time, she admitted. But I am learning to accept it. Good. He leaned against the balcony rail, his gaze following hers to where Finn practiced below. He asked me yesterday if he could start learning about the seal, about what we did and why. What did you tell him? The truth. That sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save the most people. That power without sacrifice is just another form of selfishness. Torsten paused. He understood. Or at least, he is beginning to. Below, Finn disarmed his opponent and helped the boy up with a grin. The watching warriors applauded, and Finn's smile widened. No longer the frightened child in a cage, but someone who knew his own worth and was learning to wield it responsibly. We did well. Arya said quietly. We did, Torsten agreed. And we are not finished yet. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the next generation train and grow, knowing that the world they had bled to save was becoming something better with each passing day. The end.